people each other.
And they're optimal.
And they're optimal.
Yeah.
And then it's not an externality from
Exactly.
getting in the car with.
As long as there's a Lagrange multiplier that I'm getting somehow in terms of my future utility on anything that I do that affects your utility. Yeah, Daiichi.
Can we explain it like another way by saying that if your driver is drunk, then you always have the option of taking a taxi or staying at a hotel and getting out of the situation that way, and then price mechanism will mediate that. But like, there's no option of like.
No, I don't think that does it, because it's not about. It's about how much your utility is affected by the other person, whether they take that into account, not the options that you have available to you. You always have the options available to you that can let you avoid any externality. I mean, for example, I can always shoot myself, and then I don't face any externality from anybody, right? So it just couldn't possibly be about the choices that I have to avoid the externality.
But isn't it that like if the taxi drivers are benefiting through the price mechanism because of the driver's behavior, then that's like not a real externality?
No, because it's a harm to me, and the taxi drivers might benefit, but it's not being mediated through the price that the taxi drivers are getting. They're only going to benefit after my thing has fallen by enough that I'm actually going to switch my decision. And at that point, the externality stops occurring. So it's not even, you see what I mean? It's like.
Yeah, so it's a problem of like the options being discrete, right? So like.
Well, if they weren't discrete, then, you know, then there wouldn't be any harm anyways. So, you know, then I wouldn't be harmed at all because I'm completely indifferent between. So all the harm is occurring when I'm planning to go in the car with you and not take a taxi, you know? Eric, yeah?
So just to be clear, basically like a true externality, or like the reason like puny externalities are not true externalities is that the market price will shift, and then the market will still clear because.
And then there's an offsetting benefit for every harm that occurs as a result of the price shifting.
So in this instance, like could you treat like getting in the car as like agreeing to buy, and like the price is the risk involved in going in the car?
No, because it needs to be that I am internalizing whatever the harm that's being caused is, right? That's what, I mean, because there's clearly a harm occurring to me that's not having any offsetting positive benefit, right? When I get drunk and drive with you. The question is whether I internalize that because of some future value that you give me. Eric, A?
So it's the fact that the difference between the two situations is when you decide to get drunk and it's anonymous and you're just by yourself driving, no one can hold you
accountable for that. Yeah.
But you know, if you put a sign on your car that said like, "My name is Eric Anderson. This is my phone number, and I'm drunk," and they can hold me to account for that, that would like mediate. It would no longer.
Yeah, if I lost reputation points as a result of that.
Everyone would know I'd be punished, or I'd have to take that into account. That if I were drunk, then.
Yeah, so if we got a system of total information awareness, like I was advocating in the last lecture, where there was like cameras constantly on you, and everything that you did got you like a social demerit, then there would be no problem with that, right? Yeah, Jim. Techno-socialism, as I invented the term for it yesterday.
So if is a reasonable way of thinking about this in general is going, there are no externalities in any game in which the equilibrium action of players is that by optimizing their own outcomes, they're also going to be optimizing the social outcome. And so any game which satisfies
that's
that,
the VCG mechanism. What you just described is the Veckery-Clark-Groves mechanism, which is the mechanism which internalizes externalities. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll talk about that next lecture, actually. Another question. Is there an internality on yourself when you get drunk and drive? Is Kentaro here?
Yep.
Yeah, what do you think? Because you might have an accident, and that might affect the rest of your life. Is that an internality on yourself?
Yeah, well, for if that accident, basically, we use your mind, and it's internal, but if it affects the other people, then it will be external.
Well, Well, but isn't it internality? Is it something we should try to correct? Well, it depends on whether my discount rate when I'm starting to get drunk or when I'm thinking about whether to get drunk is higher or lower than the interest rate, right? If my short term, if I've got a beta delta preference, I've got some weird time discounting thing and I'm not discounting at the interest rate, well then it is an internality on my future self, right? How about, is there an externality on your family and those who depend on you? What do you think, Chrissy?
The same way that you're talking about ownership of the property rights, I guess it depends on, how tightly linked you are with your family versus being like a free agent. So there would be a huge externality on my family,
Yeah.
but maybe not on somebody else's family.
Yeah. Well, so it depends on whether your family whether you are altruistic enough towards your family, and your family sort of like can find out that you got drunk and make you feel bad about it, or if in the state when you get hit by a car, you're dead already, so it doesn't matter, and all these sorts of ways that I can internalize the.
You call shame, right?
Yeah, the shame.
Causes shame. That's like
That internalizes the externality. Yeah, exactly. If the shame fully takes it into account, that's right. How about, is there an externality on children that you haven't currently had, but might in the future potentially have? What do you guys think? Anybody want to fill that one?
If you're pregnant while you're drinking.
Well, it depends on your answer to this question up here, right? If we should be subsidizing children in the future to take into account the utility you might cause, but we're not, then it's not mediated through the price system, and so you don't, right? So one question about this is that, in some sense, your future self and the child are being treated exactly the same here, right? If we think you should internalize the child's utility, right, then you should, that's the same exact sort of a situation when you're not discounting the future at the right interest rate, right? So, okay. Most economists' favorite response to externalities is to tax or subsidize the activity. So if it's an external harm, you should tax the activity. If it's an external benefit, you should subsidize. This is a simple solution that directly creates prices for the relevant activity. And the tax should be in an amount that's equal to the marginal externality at the optimal level, because otherwise it doesn't play the same role as prices. However, having a constant tax at this level can be inadequate. And Eric Anderson, why is that the case? Why might it not be enough to get us to the right equilibrium to just say, well, we're going to set the tax at the optimal tax at the equilibrium level and just hope things work themselves out?
Could you rephrase?
So imagine that there are externalities to being on Facebook, right? Because if another person gets on Facebook, that benefits other people because they can interact with them. So one thing that we could do as society, or that Facebook might do, is subsidize the cost of using Facebook in order to get more people on board, right? But imagine Facebook's just getting started up. Would it make sense or be sufficient to just subsidize it by the amount that we would at equilibrium?
No.
Why not?
Because the amount that you're at when it's just starting is different than the amount in equilibrium. So the benefits to the people. Presumably when there were 10 people on Facebook,
Yeah.
the 11th and 12th people were relatively more valuable than the 500 million.
Well, even if they weren't relatively more valuable, we're never going to get to the equilibrium unless you subsidize a ton at the beginning. Because initially, there's little value to getting on Facebook. if there's not many people there, right? So to get to the equilibrium, we might need to actually subsidize more initially and then make up for those losses on the profits that we make at the equilibrium, right? So that's the reason why lots of internet companies lose money initially and then make it up later, right? Is because they're trying to subsidize to get to critical mass to achieve those network effects. So the University of Chicago Economics Department is doing something like this right now. So we're trying to make offers to a bunch of really, really prominent economists at double their current salaries, not because at equilibrium, when we have a big department, that was what we'd have to pay people to take care of the network effects, but because we're well below the level, and because people don't want to come to a department where there aren't lots of other good young people, and so we're trying to subsidize a lot initially in order to get up to the right level, right? Okay. This is called an insulating tariff, and it's used to avoid coordination failures. Now, the most common practical application of taxes for externalities is taxes on pollution. So one example of this is the effluent tax that was proposed by Lawrence White, which is that rather than mandating that cars have to have clean features, we just have them be tested every so often, and then they get taxed based on how much pollution they're producing. And that tax could be different in different areas. So like in Houston, probably doesn't matter that much if there's pollution because it's so spread out that even if cars are polluting, it doesn't cause that much accumulation of pollution. Whereas in New York City, it would be really, really bad. And so you would charge a higher tax there. The French government charges every factory. It samples everything coming out of the stacks and charges them a whole bunch of taxes based on all the pollution that's coming out. Carbon taxes are based on the same principle. And we'll talk a lot more about this on Tuesday. But in Europe, anytime you release carbon, you have to effectively pay a tax that comes implicitly through a cap-and-trade system that we'll talk about in a minute. So economists usually prefer these types of taxes over direct regulation. And why is that the case, Stan? Why don't economists think we should just mandate how much pollution a factory puts out? They think instead we should have this sort of a tax.
Well, a tax just simply gives more room for the market to sort of stretch, and if you can really figure out exactly how much the externality is, and you find out the perfect tax, and it makes it sure so when you add a tax and say but things are very inelastic and you can adjust more based on trying to directly manipulate the market.
Yeah, so the key thing I think is that regulation doesn't really target the key issue because it says this company shouldn't be producing as much, but it doesn't necessarily say overall we don't want the production of this harmful pollutant. And if some people are much more efficient at reducing their pollution than other people, then there can be a benefit to having those people reduce it and not the other people, and the price will cause everyone to reduce, but oh gosh. Okay, so an example of this was that Meredith Fowley and her co-authors looked at the system for regulating nitrous oxide pollution. And the system in the United States for that is basically that big factories have to have nitrous oxide below a certain level. But there's no regulation on emissions of nitrous oxide by cars. And that's really inefficient because what they found is that if you look at the cumulative distribution function of the cost of reducing nitrous oxide for firms and versus the cost, which is basically constant, of cars reducing their nitrous